Last class, we discussed the decline of Western society and civilization and why it's happening. We discussed the theories. Today, we will look at what the reality on the ground is, what the actual trends are, what are the concrete examples of decline in the Western world. All right, so let me start with this young man. His name is Axel Ruda Cubana. And he was 17 years old when last year he took a knife and he walks into a dance studio in Southport, Britain. And then he proceeds to stab the little girls inside the dance studio. And they are 5, 6, 7. He kills 3 of them. He is quickly arrested by the police. And as you can see, he is a very disturbed young man. He clearly has a mental illness. Otherwise, why would he kill children? And he was sentenced to 52 years behind bars. So he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So justice was done. What happens next is that all throughout Britain, there are riots and protests. What happened was that rumors start to spread online about the attack. They claimed that the young man was an asylum seeker, an immigrant. And because there are too many immigrants coming to England, everyone's safety is at stake. So as you can see, these protests were extremely heated. They were extremists, they were anti-immigrant, and ultimately it led to violence between the police and the protesters. And this is happening all throughout Britain. Last summer, the country of England burned, basically. Literally burned. Okay? So these protesters were setting cars on fire, and they were targeting immigrants in Britain. Remember that this 17-year-old boy, he's actually not an immigrant. He was born in Wales to parents who are from Rwanda. Okay, so he is a British citizen. As you can see, the men who participated in the protests, they're not sad about what they're doing. They feel virtuous. They feel righteous. They feel proud for protecting their people against immigrants. So the question for us today is, why is this happening? Why are all these civil conflicts caused by immigration throughout the Western world? So this is happening in Britain, but as you know, immigration in the United States led to the victory of Donald Trump in last year's elections in the United States. A lot of conflict comes from the fact that immigration is happening too fast in the Western world. So after COVID, you see this large spike in immigrants. The other issue is that most of these immigrants are coming from countries in the Middle East, in Africa, in East Asia. So it's clear that these people are different from you. Okay, so before, there might have been a lot of EU, European immigrants, but now it's just mainly countries outside of Europe. So the British people feel as though they're being invaded by foreigners. The changes, demographic changes to British society are stark. So I'm not sure if you can see this clearly, okay, but like the dark brown are places where in the past 5-10 years, the immigrant population has tripled 3 times, okay? And as you can see, there are quite a few pockets where immigration is sort of overwhelming the local population. So if you go to Britain, there are some places where you feel this is like Morocco, or this is like Rwanda, or maybe even Egypt. Okay? So the British people feel they're under siege. And this is happening throughout the Western world. So this is Australia, okay? So Australia after COVID, huge spike in immigration. And most of them are coming from non-European countries. So the greatest spike is in India, but then you also have China and the Philippines as well. These are the three major sources of immigrants to Australia, okay? The same is happening in France, where you're seeing a huge spike in immigration. And again, most of the immigrants are coming from African or Middle Eastern countries. And so the French feel as though their culture is being diluted, it's being attacked and invaded. This is happening all throughout Western Europe. The UK, France, Italy, and Germany are seeing a huge spike in immigrants and refugees. And so their culture feels threatened. What's also happening is a huge spike in inflation. Okay, so there's something called the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is just measuring the price of basic goods like food and shelter. Okay, and as you can see, there's a huge spike in prices. So as these immigrants are coming into your country, you also feel as though your quality of life is getting worse and worse. It's getting harder for you to afford basic goods like rent and food. It's getting harder for you to support your family. The major increase is in housing prices. Okay, so Canada, these past 5 years, has seen a huge influx of immigrants, and this has caused housing prices to skyrocket. The United States, which has a much larger economy than Canada, the housing prices are pretty stable. You can still afford to buy a house if you're a young person in the United States, not in Canada. Okay, you see this huge spike in Canada. The housing prices are now unaffordable. This is a chart that shows you economic growth as compared to housing prices. So as you can see in the United States, housing prices, there's a correlation between income and housing prices. Okay, this is pretty reasonable. In Canada, it is not reasonable. Okay? So GDP, housing prices is growing like this, but housing prices is just skyrocketing. And that's why Canadians feel as though the Canadian dream of one day having their own house, it's basically dead. So one strange thing is that as Canada lets in more immigrants, and as property prices go up, you would think that they would build more and more houses. But as you can see, housing supply, it's pretty flat, even though immigration is going up. Does anyone know why this would be the case? Why is it that you have a policy of letting in more immigrants, but you don't have a policy of building more housing for them? That's kind of strange, right? Can anyone guess why that would be the case? Yeah? Sorry, can you speak in the microphone? Thank you.
Okay, maybe they want to make sure that the housing's not affordable, maybe because they want to make more money. Because now there's like more competition for housing. Definitely, as you said, the prices of housing was like going like skyrocketing, and people would make more money. Like people who provide the housings would naturally, real estate people make more money, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly correct, okay? So policy is not being controlled by what's best for the nation and the people. It's controlled by vested interests that will make money off the process, right? So as you say, real estate developers can make money off this process, but the people who benefit the most are actually property owners, right? So if you already have a house, if the supply is constant but the demand goes up, then you know from economics class that the value of a house increases artificially. So it's making homeowners very happy. Okay? And that's why you have this crisis in Canada. The other issue that's really problematic in the Western world is that as the number of immigrants goes up, Native people, the Native population, they're not having children. Okay, so this is Canada, where the birth rate, okay, the blue is the birth rate, okay, it's steadily going down, whereas immigrants are going up. So it's the immigrants who provide most of the new people in Canada. In fact, right now, 25%, a quarter of all Canadians are first-generation immigrants. First-generation Canadians, meaning that they're immigrants to the country. And if you just look at this trend, in 40 years' time, 50 years' time, there'll be very few white Canadians in Canada. And this is causing a lot of conflict and tension in the country. So you have these huge issues. Housing is unaffordable. Inflation is going up. Ethnic tensions are increasing. But the Canadian government still insists on increasing the number of immigrants in the country. Okay? There's no policy rollback where like, you know what, let's have a moratorium. Clearly, our policy is too rapid and we need to slow things down. In fact, as you can see, they're actually going to ramp up the process. The goal for Canada, right now the Canadian population is about 35 to 40 million people. They want 100 million people in Canada by the year 2100. And guess what? The majority of these people are going to come from India and probably China. Okay? And as we discussed, the percentage of immigrants as part of the total population, it's just rapidly increasing. So in Australia, it's almost a third now. In Canada, it's a quarter. In Germany, it's a fifth. And these percentages will go up and up and up, leading to more and greater ethnic tension and immigrant protests within these countries. As you can see, the number of immigrants coming from India far surpasses that of other countries, okay? And these are just legal immigrants. We're not counting in students. So there are millions and millions of Indian students right now in Canada on student visas. And they're looking for a path to permanent residency, to citizenship. And that's what leads to situations like this, okay? You have these viral videos online where you have thousands and thousands of Indian students lining up for hours and hours because they're applying for a minimum wage job at a restaurant or at a store. Life for these Indian students is just terrible. A lot of them live 8 to a room. Okay? There's one room that was meant for one person. There are now 8 students living in that room. At the same time, what's really interesting is that the Indians are now an extremely powerful political force in Canada. This was the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, meeting with representatives of the Indian community because he depends on them for his votes. In last year's federal election, 22 Indian people of Indian descent were elected to parliament, okay? So in parliament, there's 343 seats. 22 of them now are Indian. How many Chinese? How many MPs of Chinese origin? There are less than 10. So even though the Chinese have been there longer, and even though they're actually the more numerous Chinese than Indians, the Indians are an extremely powerful political force. And a lot of it is because Indians come from democracy, so they're very good at debate. They're very good at organizing. They're very good at collective action. And that's what leads them to excel in the Canadian political system. At the same time, we can imagine that if current trends continue, if the immigrant population from India increases, and if the Indians continue to amass more political power, there could be a situation where the Indians take over the Canadian government in like 20 or 40 years' time. So there's a real risk that in Canada, that their native population gets replaced by the Indians. And this is happening elsewhere as well. Yes, a question.
All the Indian immigrants that you have mentioned, like it took a part of the Canadian population. How about having the risk of Indians took over Canadian But how about the people that is local in Canadian? Like, how are they doing right now? Because we are all focusing on immigrants.
Right, okay. That's a great question, okay? So immigrants are suffering, but actually the local population is suffering even more because as we discussed last class, the economy is declining and it's pretty rapid decline. So it's harder for young people to find jobs, especially with immigrants coming into the country, right? Prices are very expensive nowadays. So it's very hard for young people to live and work in big cities. So as these immigrants are coming into the country, they're putting tremendous pressure on the local population. And that's why there's so much ethnic tension throughout the Western world right now. Okay? So this leads us to a paradox. If immigrants are making life worse for everyone, especially young people, who's the future of these nations, why is this happening? Okay? So I want you guys to keep this in the back of your mind. You probably know the answer already because you know how property prices work, right? Okay,